Hello and welcome to today's webcast, Windows Server 2003 Modernizations, Challenges, and Solutions. I'm Shandani McDermott. I'm part of the marketing team here at Datalink and will be your moderator today. Before we begin, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. This webcast is designed to be interactive between you and the presenters. The webcast console you're looking at can be customized. You can resize, move any of the windows you have open. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets you can use. If you have any questions during the webcast, click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your questions. We do capture all the questions submitted. If you are experiencing any difficulty, please visit the webcast help guide by clicking on the question mark icon below the presentation window. The help guide covers common technical issues. I would now like to turn the presentation over to our first presenter, John Richardson, from Datalink's Advanced Services team.
Thank you, Shandani. Today, we're going to talk about yet another deadline that nearly every IT shop is facing. We'll discuss strategies on how to deal with it and provide some real in the trenches commentary. We've heard the news that after 12 years, Microsoft is ending support for Windows Server 2003. And the word is we all need to get off this platform quick. Let's dig into why they're saying it and why Microsoft recently estimated that millions of servers still are not upgraded yet. Out-of-support servers are easily identified by hackers as a lever to compromising your entire infrastructure. Out-of-support servers are by definition out of compliance. And whether it's internal auditors, the government, or your customers auditing you, being out of support at best looks very bad, and at worst can impact your stock price, or under the terms of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, can even mean jail time for your executives. Beyond that, though, it costs more to manage and maintain aging infrastructure, and running Windows 2003 still is keeping you from reaping some of the benefits of modern technology. And the benefits come in direct cost savings. Today's powerful processors will support far more workload than the older gear that's typically been running Windows Server 2003. And the reduction in servers is also going to reduce your data center costs across the board. But also, modern platforms are much easier to configure and have many more management toolkits that allow for anything from automated patching to automated provisioning and end-user self-service options. And as you look at the cloud, having a modern platform gives you the best options available. So with all these benefits, why is it that so many servers still aren't upgraded? Well, there are some obstacles. So this is a migration, not an in-place upgrade. So every application has to individually be migrated from the old to the new. There's a lot of complexity there, and the time crunch of getting it done quickly just adds more complexity to the job. And it totally requires a lot of resources to plan and execute this migration. With any migration that you're going to do, there's risk of outages or data loss that have to be addressed. And many shops, just for whatever reason, don't have 100% visibility into which apps are still on 2003 and why they still are there. Finally, some apps are going to require some help to migrate. They may need just some tweaking, or they may need complete replatforming. So there's a lot of reasons why everyone's not done migrating. I want to put a plug alert in here to just tell you that our goal today is to give you strategies to get your migration to the finish line, and one we'd like you to consider is partnering with us to get the work done. Datalink is a large team dedicated just to helping our customers with this particular set of problems. And we can get it done quickly, whether it's a turnkey operation or sharing tasks with your team. We've got creative solutions and shortcuts to help you meet the challenging deadlines. But our methodology, which we'll drill into in a little bit, allows us to move more quickly and at the same time reduce your risk in a migration. And all of our investments in staffing, tools, and methodology mean that we can, combined with your team, do it for far less than you could do it in-house. So that's a little bit of the plug, a little bit more. For those of you who aren't Datalink customers, a little bit about us. For those on the call who are Datalink customers, we thank you for your business and look forward to helping you navigate this and other challenges you may have. Really, the thing to take away from this is we're a large enough company to have substantial resources to help you, and yet we're still a great match for mid-market IT shops. So I mentioned that I would get some in-the-trenches perspective for you, and to provide that, I'm joined by Paul Johnson, a senior manager in Datalink's data center transformation practice. Paul has been a data center professional for more than 20 years, including 2 stints as a CIO and involvement in literally dozens of migration projects. Most recently, Paul's been in the program manager for one of Datalink's largest migrations, which we'll talk about later. So Paul, how does Datalink package its Windows 2003 migration services? What's in the box?
Sure, John. Hey, so what we've done is we've kind of broken the engagement into 2 logical buckets, if you will, right? What's in the box? So let's look at the first box, discovery and assessment services. What we do in this phase is basically just do the deep dive, right? We come in, we need to understand your environment, right? Help you understand how big is the problem, right? Is it the size of a bread box or is it the size of a Mack truck, right? We come in and we look at the level of effort, we estimate time, resources, and we try and work with you to figure out how disruptive this project's going to be. So the output of this engagement is really a detailed plan, okay? And that plan is what we use then in the migration services piece of this engagement. So the line in the sand is kind of right between the 2. The first part of this, again, discovery and assessment services, is figuring out kind of the current state and building a plan for remediation. The migration services is really executing on that plan. And we wrap all these together with project management. We feel that any type of engagement like this requires a project management dedicated team to try and reduce the risk and drive that project forward. There's going to be a lot of moving parts moving forward in this thing.
Awesome. We'll drill into that a little bit more. And you've told us a little bit about what's in the migration services, and we know you've got a methodology. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Our methodology is pretty simple, right? It's discovery, analysis, plan, and execution. So let's go back to discovery for a second. I kind of was just hitting on that. We're going to do the deep dive, right? We're going to figure out what the inventory is. How many of these servers are 2003? Now, this is where we deviate probably from some other folks in the world, right? We take an application-based approach to migration. And what that really means is we focus on the applications and its dependencies, and then we map it back to the infrastructure, okay? And that might be a little bit different because we look at it from we cannot take business outage, and we are moving applications. We're not just moving servers. So we take that information, we collect it, working with you, we document that world, we assess the criticality, right, of those applications we found. Are they, how many people are dependent on them? Are there batch jobs? What's the outage window we can take? And we work with you to kind of put to bed this is the current state discovery, and we move into analysis. So now we have all this documentation. Now we have to kind of catalog it. What do we do with these things? How do we group this stuff? So we catalog things by criticality, complexity, type. We look at apps by categorization. We look at different apps. We kind of group them by, are they web servers? Are they file servers? What are they, right? And then we look at how are we going to disposition them. So this is what we call the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So the good being, hey, this can migrate right over. There's not going to be any challenges. It looks like it's good to go. Let's move it forward. Or remediation or decommissioning, right? So that's what we do in the analysis phase. In the analysis phase, we look at what we have, and then we start to move into the planning phase. And the planning phase is really we need to determine, right, what the target destination is going to be for each one of those apps. And then we start grouping those destinations into migration waves. And we look at these waves for a couple of reasons, right? We looked at, hey, this application has multiple dependencies. We need to move that all together in a wave. What else can we move in that wave, right? So once we kind of agree to how we're going to move it and we kind of lay out a preliminary timeline, right, we start looking at development of the run books. And the run books, to be honest with you, they're a step-by-step plan to support the transformation, really. And that's how we're actually going to migrate that server, right, and those apps. So So that goes into execution, and execution, if we do all our homework right, if you kind of look at how this works, it kind of feeds each other, right? The methodology feeds into the execution phase, and the execution phase is really nothing more than executing on the run books. Okay?
Excellent. So that's the methodology at a high level. We'll drill down on this in a little bit into more detail and get some of your war stories from the trenches. But, Datalink is at any time of the day, any day of the week, any week of the year, we're migrating multiple platforms for our customers. And we've learned a lot in that. What are the key takeaways that we bring to the table when talking about migrations that our customers here on the phone can share?
Oh, sure. I think some of the big things we have them outlined here, these are our guiding rules here, right, is that we realize that businesses really aren't, these business applications are critical, and seldom can they really take an extended outage. Even if it's a 2003 server, there's people dependent using that application. So we always try and we push the envelope of saying, we're assuming you can't make an extended outage, and we want the client and the business unit and the application owners to tell us, no, we can take a long outage. So those are one of the things we look at. And I mentioned it earlier, is we really focus on migrating applications and understanding the impact of the business, right? We take an application-based approach to migrations, and that's a little I think that makes us a little different than everyone else out there, to be honest with you. And I hit on mapping the dependencies, right? So we need to know what that application touches. Is there batch processing? How many users? Are there SLAs on this application? So that's really what we focus on for migration. Now, the rest of these it's a little different. I'm going to kind of summarize these a little bit and kind of throw my 2 cents in along the way. One of the goals is when you're doing a migration like this, that you want to end in the optimum state, right? You want to optimize your environment. And in an ideal world, you have all the time in the world, right? You would have a nice plan. You'd move an app over. You'd make sure it lands in the right architecture. You do your testing, and everything's going to be great. We've got a little bit of a deadline here, John. We've got 2003 looming, and that's a compliancy issue. So we have to balance that, right? That optimization versus compliancy. And, I think every night I watch on the news, there's been a new security breach. Compliancy is the real deal. And the last thing you want to do is be on the news at night, right? So this is something that we can kind of help with sometimes. You always want to keep targeting that optimized state, but maybe there's some tools that we can bring to you that can help, I'll say, buy you some time in that compliancy arena, right? And the other thing I think on this specific event, it's a great time to actually leverage this compelling event of 2003, right, and drive change into your organization. Get yourself in a position where you can build the business case and say, I don't ever want to be looking down the end of this barrel again of 2003. We need to be more proactive in how we maintain our operating systems, how we perform upgrades, and manage our security environment. So I'd encourage you, I guess the call to action is on the customer and the client side is, we want to come help you make sure that you use this event to change how you run your IT organization too.
Well, and certainly this is not going to be the last deadline-driven upgrade that we're going to have to do. So,
no, John, we've got people actually, calling us already on 2008, if you can believe that, because they know that's just a few years out. So,
and sequel 2005 is next year, so there'll be plenty of fun there, and it's a great time to take these lessons learned and figure it out. And no matter when you start, there's going to be a certain amount of optimization you can do before you migrate and a certain amount that you're going to wait for afterward.
Absolutely.
So what we want to do now is take this thought of sharing our best practices with the folks on the call and drill down a little bit more and talk about the various stages in our methodology, why they're there, what they do, and maybe throw in some colorful war stories for us. So, Paul, you've managed dozens of projects. What does a structured program management model bring to the table, and why doesn't everyone use it?
Well, let's take the second part of that. Why doesn't everybody use it? That's always a challenge, right? A lot of IT organizations just don't understand that they need to not look at this from a pure technical approach, right? And a lot of organizations just don't have the money or the ability to scale or the desire to invest in a program management capability. So, it's a maturity thing, in my opinion. It's just one of those things that you'll get there eventually, and you'll understand the benefits of program management like we do. What we've learned over the years is program management reduces risk, right? It allows the project to move more aggressively. And what it really does under the covers is, right, it makes sure everyone is in alignment on the goals, right? What are we doing? What's our charter, right? It helps coordinate the resources needed to do it. It builds the communication infrastructure so that we have channels to communicate. And then the big piece of it is it's monitoring, right? It holds people accountable during the execution of the work. And there's one that I think is actually almost the most important thing is it's the escalation capability. You have weekly touch points, if not daily touch points, depending on the engagement, right, with the project sponsor. The project sponsor is the person that can help get those roadblocks out of the way, right? That's their senior directors or whoever it might be on your team, right? But having that visibility really helps get the roadblocks out of the way. And once again, I'm going to go back to it reduces the risk and it helps drive the project faster. So a couple things, right? We work on all different size organizations. I'll pick on the large ones right now. There's some very large organizations we work with, and what we've learned around project program management when working with them on migrations is there's silos. If you think about how many people and how many departments and divisions you have to talk to migrate that application, you're going to probably be looking at, I'm going to have to take my socks off the count, right? I mean, probably 12 to 14 organizations. And what we've learned is these silos sometimes just don't hand off very nicely between each other. So what we've done is we've learned to put in program governance over the top of those silos, put project coordinators in each one of those silos, and make sure we have some dedicated resources from the business, right? So that really helps kind of drive the project, make those handoffs smoother, and really increases the efficiency of the delivery. Small organizations, they have similar problems. They're a little different, right? But they have similar problems. Oftentimes in small organizations, you have to wear multiple hats because there's no one else to do it. You don't have those silos, but you have 4 different hats you have to put on. So a lot of times what happens if we don't have the program governance in place and project management in place, things get kicked down the road, right? Your daily job takes precedence and, everything else takes a back seat to that.
So cool. Program management. It's kind of a traffic cop. It uses communication to keep people in the loop, both when it's going well and when there are exceptions going on, drives alternative approaches when the unexpected comes up, and allows you to keep the migration on track while reducing risk. So the first step of the methodology is discovery and analysis. What's going on here?
Well, I kind of mentioned it before, and I want to key in on one thing on this slide. If you don't take anything else away from this, this is the cornerstone of how the project's going to be set up, right? And that is we need to understand the application dependencies. I mentioned it earlier. We take an application-based approach to migration. If we don't know the dependencies, we will be in a world of hurt very soon. So let me give you an example, right? Let's dig into there's an organization. It's a medical organization, and their director there was a couple senior sysadmins or engineers, if you will. They got the directive from their director saying, get these 2003 servers out of here, right? It's Monday. That's the meeting, morning meeting. Get these things out of here, right? Start getting them out of here. We've got too many. The deadline's coming. So these 2 gentlemen decide to go and snoop around the data center, and they find the oldest server they have, right? They're looking at this old box going, holy man, this thing's really old. So they look at what application's running on there, and they realize there's an application running on there, and there's another database server, and they're like, well, let's get this thing out of here first because it seems like the highest risk. I'm worried it's going to keep running till next week. So that's a decent approach, right? Look at the oldest piece of hardware, right? So Friday afternoon comes along, and they send an email out to the world, if you will, saying, hey, we're going to do some maintenance on this application over the weekend, but it'll be ready to go Monday morning, 4 a.m., and basically this application, nobody uses it over the weekend. So they thought they'd have plenty of time to make their changes that they researched a little bit during the week, right? So Saturday comes in, the gentlemen come in, they start working, they virtualize the application server, they upgrade the database, move that, and they sit down at one of the desktop computers and they fire up the application. They fire it up, it looks like it fires up, and they close it, and they're like, boy, that was easy. Let's go finish what we need to do. They went back to the data center and they took those old servers and they decommissioned them. They unscrewed them. They took them out of the rack, scavenged a couple parts from them, and they put them out on the pallet for recycling. And they were home by dinner time Saturday and feeling pretty good about how things went so far. So Monday morning comes around, and those two gentlemen decide they're going to better get in early just in case there's an issue. And as you might expect, there was a bit of an issue on Monday morning. And what they learned was that they failed to find all that application's dependencies. They missed the licensing server. Back in 2003, oftentimes there was a standalone licensing server for some of these older applications, and there was a physical dongle on the back of another box. So when the users went in, they could get into the application on their desktop because it was a fat client and everything was there loaded locally on the desktop. The minute they tried to do anything in the application, it triggered a warning message basically saying that, they cannot contact the licensing server. Please contact your system administrator. So the gentleman ran around a little bit. They found this box after a couple hours and figured out what's going on, and they quickly realized that one of the servers that the decommissioned had put out on the recycle bin is hard-coded IP to that dongle. So after a few more iterations, right, about 4 to 6 hours into this, they got that license server back up and running, and they went to test the application again, and now they found some new problems. They found that the client that's on the desktop cannot read a 2008 R2 environment. There's some more technical details behind that, but for the most part, they're now 7 to 8 hours in. There's 2,300 users spread across this environment that have not been able to use this, and they've now made the decision to roll back. The rollback procedure was pretty rough on them. It took them they had a 22-hour outage, 22 hours of outage, and it was painful. They had to put those servers back in the rack, and they actually had to go recover the database from tape, if you can believe that. So 22 hours later, lessons learned from that type of an event, you can figure it out yourself, but it's understand your dependencies, right? A couple other things that pop up, as we're talking through this a little bit. Their test plan wasn't really all that strong, right? They opened the window and they closed the window. They never even talked to the business owners. They probably could have talked to the business owners, the application business owners. They probably would have had just 1 or 2 more steps in their test plan. They probably would have found out about the licensing server. So that afternoon, that Monday afternoon, we get the call, right? Organization's furious. We get the call to say they've lost faith in us. They're so angry with us. Total 22-hour outage, 2,300 users that hit this thing. We're talking millions of dollars we've lost today in productivity. So lessons learned, map out your dependencies. Really have a good plan, right? Don't just cowboy up on the weekend and make it happen. Get your business units and application owners involved, right?
So some great lessons learned there in the discovery and analysis phase. So let's say you do your homework and you get all the information on all the apps and all the dependencies, all the assets that have to be migrated. How do these come together in the planning phase?
Sure. It's like a big puzzle at this point, right? So we have a bunch of data. We now have to solve that, right? We want to create, once again, I'll say we determine the target destinations, right? We look at how we are going to remediate these applications, and we start grouping them, as I mentioned earlier, right, in migration waves. And then we start building the run books, okay? And the run books, once again, are kind of the step-by-step plan to manage the transformation. This is the how-to we are going to do this. These are the exact steps we're going to do to move this 2003 server to 2012, right? So there's always more lessons learned here, right? And some of the times when we go through these different events, we have what we call a tabletop type exercise. And one of the things that I'm thinking of right now is we met with this organization, and outage windows, we start talking about outage windows when we're doing the planning. And the big thing that came from it is that we sat down with the internal team without the director or the sponsor there right away and kind of worked through this stuff to kind of come up with a skeleton that we're going to present to him a little later. And one thing that kept coming up was the tape backups that started on Friday nights for the Windows units that we were going to be looking at. It took 26 hours to run, 26 hours to do a full backup. So our outage window, which it was over the weekend for these applications or for these Windows servers, we lost a full day, basically. So we had to readjust. We kind of challenged the the administrator, if you will, a little bit, saying, why it doesn't add up, doesn't quite pass the sniff test, right? That you're showing me this many terabytes of data, and it's taking you 26 hours to do. Are you sure everything is functional? Obviously, they got a little defensive, which is okay. That's perfectly fine, you know. So we built the project schedule showing how, you know, a very condensed amount of time to actually do any transformation work over the weekend due to how long these backups are taking, right? So we presented that to the director. And of course, what did you think the director did, John, right? What?
Right.
What is this taking? Why 26 hours? Why is this? This is crazy. Why is this taking so long? It's not that much data. It didn't pass his sniff test either. So what we ended up doing is bringing in one of our engineers, working with their administrator, their backup administrator, and, you know, we had the opportunity to take 20 hours out of it, if you can believe it. We took 20. Wow. They had all the capacity in the world. They had everything correct. They just didn't have it quite configured correctly. So their media agents and stuff, I don't want to get off on a tangent here, but they didn't quite have their media agents set up correctly. And as soon as we did that, you know, 12 hours later, you know, a little bit of effort on our part and their part, we had this figured out, and we reduced their backup window. And obviously, we took the project that it was actually going to be 6 months. We took it down to about 2.5 months, just because we had those outage windows and the backup stuff figured out. So, I mean, this is the kind of stuff as we go in and we kind of build out these plans, we are always finding these little gotchas along the way, things that are maybe not quite right, and maybe nobody's paid attention to them because it hasn't been an issue. But when you start doing migrations and you have tight windows and outage windows and you start looking at the details and the data, you start realizing there's always going to be something like this that's lingering around out there that we'll have to kind of work with the clients, work with the customers, and kind of remediate along the way, right, before we can even get started.
Excellent. Fascinating story of how, again, you're solving the puzzle. How do you make the budget, the schedule, the resources all come together and work? And it usually takes a lot of creativity and a great solution there. Mm-hmm. So let's say we get all this done. We've got our run books. Everything's planned, ready to go. How's execution?
Hopefully it's easy. So if we did all this correctly, right, you know, it really should go easier. It really should. I mean, let's go back to the poor guys at the medical office, right? You know, if they would have done a few extra steps, if they would have talked to the business owner, if they would have had a plan, if they would have had a methodology of how they're going to collect the data instead of just, let's go find this old one, right? Let's go find this physical asset and let's move it, right? Let's look at the application and the impact on the business. And then let's work with the organization to come up with a plan on how we're going to move it. Let's make sure we understand what the impact is of us moving it and how it's going to land. So let's build the run books, right? So, I mean, if you look at what they're doing, the other piece that we didn't talk about is during, you know, their go live or their execution phase, they basically spun their wheels for almost 8 hours trying to figure out what to do, right? If we would have had the right testing procedures in place with the business, we would have known Saturday afternoon that there was a problem. Right, if you look back at that story. So, I mean, I think that one of the things I want everyone to take away is have a plan, right? That's the big thing. So execution is really, you know, we're going to look at contingency plans. How do we roll back? We're going to have that go, no-go decision. Do we have all the boxes checked? Do we know how to roll back? Are we comfortable with everything? And then we just go right into using our run books, right, to move through the process and migrate things.
Well, neat. So it sounds like if we do the plan properly and the discovery properly, execution gets a lot easier. And hopefully
really should,
everyone
right?
on the and I'm hoping that everyone who's joined us on the phone is getting at least one tidbit that'll help them in dealing with their Windows 2003. And it's not just small customers having issues. Here's a good-sized customer that you actually worked on, Paul. Tell us a little bit about this. And also the question I'm sure on everyone's mind is, how different is this from, say, a 50 or 100 server migration?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, John, it's not different at all. I mean, the methodology scales up and down. So yeah, discovery will take longer because there's, you know, 3,400 servers we have to go kind of figure out what's going on with. But the methodology works either way, big, small, whatever you would like to do. You know, once again, a big organization, they had a program going on for 2 years before they engaged us. They stalled out. Remember I was talking about silos before, about large organizations sometimes get stuck and they're just not doing nice handoffs between these silos. Well, we landed a small team in there. We got entrenched with their current process and what was going on for a few weeks, and we were able to point out how we can streamline the process and make it a little bit more efficient. And then we were able to strategically put key people into different areas to really drive this thing across the finish line for them. Yeah, we put some technical people in, but we put more program management and project coordinators and oversight into the project. And really, we worked with the silos to make the handoffs work better. And honestly, it paid dividends. They're very happy with where they are, and they're going to be coming across the finish line better than they thought. So,
excellent. Well, thanks for sharing that with us, and the idea that really it's a common set of issues, no matter what size the migration. So another small plug here, just to point out that Datalink has done this kind of migration and relocation work using this same methodology across a number of different industries, from legal, financial, technical, and even metals recycling, and different sizes. So, it's, again, the lessons learned come from all shapes and sizes of migration. So let's summarize where we're at. If you're challenged meeting this July deadline, you're not alone. Microsoft thinks there's still millions of servers out there, and we think that's probably a good number. It may even be a little low. But certainly there are a lot of good reasons why the deadline is a challenge. It's not easy work, whether you're doing it on your own or with a partner. There are some challenges.
yeah, there really are. The big thing I want people to understand is, the important steps to take to make this migration work is to, get a plan, right? If you hear me loud and clear, get a plan, do an assessment. Don't do what the other IT director did at the medical place, tell your people to go get this done. Don't take the shotgun approach. Slow down, get a plan, build a methodology, do it right, and you'll drive this thing across the finish line, and you won't have egg on your face looking bad, right? They'll be looking to you as being a trusted advisor, making sure things go well. So what you're doing has a huge impact on your reputation as IT, right? And then the other piece of this is really, you're going to have to figure out your balance on optimization, right? You always want to keep driving toward the optimum solution, but you're going to have to take a little sidetrack and get some compliancy in place to give you some time to work on your optimization.
Cool. And one more plug alert. Datalink can help you get to that compliant place quickly, effectively, and affordably. So hopefully you've gotten some good takeaways out of our discussion today. And now I'd like to start going to questions. And as Shandani mentioned before, on your console, there's a Q&A box, and you can put your questions in there. And we've got a couple to go through already, Paul. So
okay.
You mentioned that you do application-based migrations versus asset-based. Is that more work, and is it worth it?
Well, I think it's a little bit more work up front, right? We're doing a lot of work, before we ever get to an execution phase, and I totally think it's worth it. It removes that risk the best we can, right? There's always going to be a risk when you're doing something like this, but if we can put all that work up front, you heard me say discovery, analysis, and plan, line in the sand, right? And then we start doing the execution. So it's really important to do it right, and that's what we do, and this is why we've been successful doing this, following this methodology, John.
Cool, thank you. Okay, next one. In discovery, you determine the criticality of each application. How do you do this?
Well, we talk to the business application owners. It's not there's no secret sauce around that. We have a conversation. We understand. We ask questions around what that application is doing, what service is it providing, what's dependent on it, because that's going to help us grade and rate this thing, right? Where is it, should it be, and it's really that simple.
Okay. We are doing a migration and not using a dedicated project manager. What do the engineers need to do to manage the risk?
Well, I think I said it a few minutes ago. Build a plan, come up with a plan and a methodology to follow. How are you going to do it? Who needs to be involved? And make sure you have a good communication plan, an escalation plan, have a sponsor, have meetings, drive the accountability to the project. And next thing I would say is make sure you get those dependencies right. And and make sure the business application users and owners are involved in the process.
Okay. Here is one. How do you deal with application packages that won't run on 64-bit Windows? Generally speaking, you have database management service end-of-life issues too. How do you deal with all the simultaneous challenges?
That's a tricky question. Oftentimes we can bring some tools, and I don't want to get too technical on this call, but we have tools that we can bring sometimes that might allow us to put a wrapper around the database or the application. Now, databases are tougher, right? You can't always put a wrapper and a container around them. So we have to deal with those on a one-off basis and really do the research and come up with a plan to remediate them.
But obviously you want to find those in discovery and analysis.
That's
Good
when
question.
we want to look at them. This is the challenge, right?
All right. So I've got one final question here. What percentage of time in a migration is discovery, analysis, and planning versus execution?
It really is 80-20. 80% of the time we work on a project is discovery, analysis, and planning. And if we get that piece right, the execution is the smallest piece. It's the 80-20 rule. Yeah, maybe it's 70-30 sometimes, but it traditionally falls into about 80-20.
Excellent. Well, that's all the questions we've got at this point, so I think it's time to finish up. One question that has come in, just a second here. Let me get it. How long did it take you to do the bank's 3,000 servers?
Oh, it took us, and is still taking us, to about 13 months.
Okay. And some of those were already done before that?
Some of those were, yeah. A couple of them were.
Yeah.
I'd have to go look at my exact numbers. I can't remember off the top of my head, but we're coming across the finish line with just a few left. And those are the ones that they know that they're not going to move right now. So we're looking at more, once again, compliancy issues and paying for compliancy support sometimes, or looking to other ways to do that to help get those things in a near term, remediated. So we're coming across pretty well.
Thanks. Well, Paul, your insights have just been terrific, and I thank you for joining us and taking time out of your schedule to share what you've learned in dozens of migrations with the folks out there. And really appreciate it. And hopefully folks out there, you know where to find us. We've got a website based just on migrations, that the URL is there. Or you can call our 800 number to find out more about it. If you are a Datalink customer, thank you again for your business, and just reach out to your Datalink representative to find out more about this. Shandani, do you want to send us home?
Sure. Thank you for attending today's webcast. An on-demand version of this webcast will be available in 2 to 3 days. You will receive an email notification once the recording is available. Otherwise, thank you for participating in today's webcast.